Hello, parents and teachers who may be watching. Welcome to Creating Math Ahas for Parents. I'm Dr. Sandy Atkins, Sandy, and in this video, we'll look at some of the ways that your child may be experiencing division in grade 3. Now, for many of us, grade 3 and in many districts, this is the year that we really get into multiplication division. We build the foundation in grades 1 and 2. We can even do story problems relate to division in kindergarten in terms of fair share, sharing equally, sharing things with your friends so you each get the same amount. They're really acting out in that social interaction, the foundation for what we'll need them to understand division. But in grade 3, in many places, is where we really formally look at division. Now, in my memory, my early experience with division involved a lot of memorization. It was a lot of fact memorization, symbol memorization. But what your child may be experiencing is division in a way that helps build understanding, helps build the language of the word problems that they'll be seeing, helps them be able to model it in different ways. So as your child is experiencing division in grade 3, you may see them using certain models. These are base 10 models where I have 100 tens and ones. I have a centimeter grid paper version of the same thing. They may be using something that looks like this, an equal grouping chart, and we'll be looking at that and how that comes into play. You're going to be seeing a lot of models that build the understanding, because we know for your child to be mathematically proficient, they can, within procedures, use them flexibly. It's not that we're going to teach your child a bunch of different techniques and they pick the one that helps them get an answer. It's that they can be playful with number, they can be confident in using many different strategies, and then pick one that's most closely representing the problem. If it's a word problem, pick the one that gives them the most efficient approach to getting the answer. If you want more information about the 5 strands, and part of that also is conceptual understanding, that procedural fluency flows from that understanding and your child can explain what they're doing and why it works. I'll leave a link below to a video on the 5 strands and you can get more information there. Now, in many districts, the expectation is that your child will be able to do division in terms of separating into equal groups, equal grouping model. They might separate into equal rows, an array model, which think about folding chairs and setting up rows of chairs where you have the same number of chairs in each group. You know how many rows you want. You may have a measurement model where you're pulling off, you're finding out how many of these groups you can get out of a quantity. There's an expectation that they can put a symbol in for the unknown in any location in division. So thinking about that and understanding the link to multiplication. So you see there's a lot more than just memorizing 24 divided by 8 is 3. That's helpful to know those facts, but what we're hoping is that anytime they see the fact, there's imagery for them involved in it, which will link again to the word problem imagery. They can model it, they can explain it and know how it works. Now, I keep mentioning separating into equal groups, and you'll hear me use that language when I see the an expression, a division expression. I'm going to try to move these without having them go all over. You might hear me talk about, so let's say, oh goodness, I was not successful. I lost some of them onto the floor. Let's say I'm going to look at a problem like this. Now, the only way I would have read this when I was younger would have been 36 divided by 3. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly all right. And I'm really just naming what the symbols mean. Now I try to read this as 36 separate into 3 equal groups. It's a partitioning model. That's one way to think about separating into equal groups. Now, the minute I say 36 separate into 3 equal groups, do you have imagery come to mind of what's going on here? Right? I could also read this as a measurement division. It's sometimes called quotitioning. You'll see it. I could ask how many 3s are in 36. I could pull off groups of 3. So think about a box of tennis balls, and I'm trying to make cans of 3 tennis balls in each can. How many cans would I be able to fill? So you see, one is pulling off, quotitioning, measurement, pulling off groups. Sometimes we hear this repeat subtraction. The other one is separating into equal groups. Now I'm going to start with separating, the partitioning model. And I want to show you this model again. Let's see if I can get it on the screen for you. This is an equal grouping model. Again, it may be introduced to your child early in grade 3, because think about what I can do. See, in this, it's the multiplication, and I'm going to look first at this problem. I have 3 groups of 12. Okay, 3 groups of 12. What they'll be doing in multiplication is they'll be moving all of this down into this bottom part. And what is our total? So whether I have them the way I had them here or I move them all, I know I've got the product is 36. Multiplication, combining equal groups. I want your child to understand that multiplication and division are inverse operations. And notice what this model lets me do. I just turn it around. I undo what I just did. What is 36 separated into 3 equal groups? So 3 groups of 12 is 36. 36 separated into 3 groups. Well, it's really nice when the places, each place is a multiple of the divisor. So in this case, each place was a multiple of the divisor. I could separate 36 into those 3 groups. Now, let's change this around. I'm going to come and I want to look at a new problem. This time, I want to look at 3 groups of 7. Now, teachers, especially if you're watching, do you notice how I've organized this 3 groups of 7 into 5 and 2? I'm using what would be a 5-frame representation, sometimes a 10-frame you'll see, but 5-frame, 5 and 2, 7. I'm doing that on purpose. Notice this image versus had I just done something like this. See, immediately I know I've got 7. It gives me an organizing structure where I don't have to count by ones for everything. The other thing, when I want to find 3 groups of 7, well, what do I have? I have 3 5s and 3 2s. This gives me a distributive property representation. So it's very purposeful for that. But just like we did with 36, I can slide these down and I can find the product. Come down, I've mentioned the 3 5s and 3 2s. Okay, some of your children will count by ones, especially if they've done more random arrangements. We get 21. Now I turn it around. But see, when we start with division, we typically don't start with 21 ones. We typically start using the fewest number of pieces. And if we aren't careful, I've seen children do this when they're asked to separate into 3 groups. They separated the 3 pieces into the 3 groups. But see, we start your child with what would be unifix cubes, something that breaks apart. See, this model doesn't break apart. So you might have seen your children in grade 1 and grade 2 with a rod of cubes that they could break apart to know the 10 ones, right? See, they put the same number of pieces in each place, but they didn't put the same quantity. See, this is understanding an equivalent way to think of 21. I can think of 21 as 2 10s and 1 1. Or I could think of it, and hopefully we have 21 ones again, right? So I could think of it as the 21 ones. I'm going to try to put this back into groups of 5. Make sure I don't have an extra one there. Okay, so I've got 21. Now I can separate it. See, division and using place value is understanding equivalency, that it's not always 2 tens and a single one. When I start to separate these into 3 equal groups, I've got 5 in each group. Now your child may go by ones. Nothing wrong with that, right? So 21 separated into 3 groups is 7. Now, notice just by changing from having a problem where each place is a multiple of the divisor to a problem where the places are not multiples of the divisor changes the complexity a bit, right? I have to understand that when I'm thinking in terms of tens and ones, I can think of 21 as 2 tens and 1 1. I can think of it as 1 10 and 11 ones. I can think of it as 21 ones. So you may see your children do what I call an equivalency chart, equivalent ways to make a quantity using tens and ones. And you're thinking, why are they doing that when they're supposed to be doing division? Well, this is going to be foundational in terms of number sense for them to be able to use that for division. Now, the other nice thing with this, see, once I get this, I can ask them what part. See, this, when they get to grade 4, I'll ask them what part of 21 is this? See, this version, this is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. What is 1/3 of 21? This imagery gives me lots of connections to what they'll be doing with division later on in terms of fractions and fraction multiplication and fraction division and linking dividing by 3 to taking 1/3 of something. So you see this model. I hope you see how the complexity changes when my places are not multiples of it. I also like to think about, we want them to be very comfortable when they see this, thinking of stories. Now, quite often, you may hear your children, or you may hear that your children have learned about a book, The Doorbell Rang. There are storybooks that your teachers may be reading to the children, and in The Doorbell Rang, somebody's making cookies, share with friends who are coming. So maybe they have 36 cookies. They're going to share with 3 friends. Okay, so you've got 3 of them are sharing the 36. How many? Then another person comes to the door. And now they're taking the 36 and sharing it among 4 friends, 4 people. And then maybe 2 more come and they take 36 and share it. So part of this is using the language, 36 separated into 3 equal groups. That also then lets me think of all kinds of stories I can do where I'm doing fair shares. I'm separating them into equal groups, okay? Now, again, this is separating into equal groups. I can do stories there. I mentioned the tennis ball. Now, if you think about what I just showed you, 36 separated into 3 equal groups, my drawing might look like this. And I tend to do sticks for tens. This is my 10. I do this for ones. I do the square for the 100. And part of the reason I do the sticks for the ones and that, I'm sorry, sticks for tens and ones, is so your children, quite often as they get going quickly, all their models start to look the same, all those rectangles. So I'm purposely setting them up to have an efficient way to draw the pictures. Now this is 36 separated into 3 equal groups. It's partitioning. Okay. Now, let's change the way I read this. The other model, the symbols look the same, but the way I interpret it is different. I might read this as how many threes are in 36. So you might hear that. And now what I'm doing here is I'm pulling off groups of 3. Here's 1. Here's 2. Right? So far I've used 15 of them. So they're pulling off groups of 3 until they've used up all 36. And again, think of this as cans of tennis balls. So I've got 6 of them, 18, right? 21, 24, 27, 30, 33, 36. Now notice what I just did. I was skip counting by 3s. But see, it's for building the link to multiplication division is we will add in a step. We might ask your child to say 1 multiple of 3 is 3, 2 multiples of 3 is 6, 3 multiples of 3 is 9, 4 multiples. Do you see I'm adding in some language? But that's the understanding I need them to have. Now, if I'm pulling off groups of 3, I want them to be able to come up with a story where that would be situation. Sometimes we might take 36 divided by 12, but think of 36 as eggs, and I'm filling dozen containers. Okay, so it's important for them to understand that how we interpret the symbols changes the drawings. They'll learn that in multiplication also. How I interpret it changes the story I can use. Okay, now I want to do one more model that your children, and there are many districts, they're introduced to area in grade 3. And so we also use area with multiplication. So let's see. Let's say I'm going to do right. We're going to think of this not as 3 groups of 4. We could think of it as 3 rows of 4, but in area, we tend to read this as 3 by 4. And your children may be using grid paper, and they may actually be seeing all these squares. And we're tying this to a 2-dimensional measure, area 2D, a square unit measure. What will eventually happen with division is, remember, we've got a 3 by 4 is 12 square units. Eventually, what will happen is we'll know the area is 12 square units. We know one dimension, and they're going to be asked to find the other. So it's a missing factor in a way. A 3 by what is going to end up giving us 12. Now, as I said, when we do division, we looked at this problem, 36 separating into 3 equal groups, and we found out this unknown. Sometimes your children may be asked, well, how many groups did I divide it into to have 12 in each group? Or I took a quantity, I separated into 3 equal groups, and I ended up with 12 in each group. How many did I start with? And there will be story problems around that. This is called result unknown. I'm trying to figure out the result of dividing. This is called change unknown. Okay, 36 divided by 12. How many did I divide it? How many groups did I put into? And this might be start unknown. What did I start with? If I separate into 3 equal groups, I ended up with 12. And you may find that your children get really comfortable with story problems and solving them that are this type, but these become more challenging. And I don't need to increase the numbers to increase the challenge. Just like 21 separating into 3 equal groups is much more complex when I'm modeling it than 36 separated into 3 equal groups. Larger numbers don't mean harder. Smaller numbers don't mean simpler. But in all of this, we're keeping in mind the models we're using. We're using them purposefully. We're trying to make sure that the models we pick also help build the link between multiplication and division. I hope you found this useful in some of the ways that your children may be experiencing division in grade 3. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Please click on the notifications bell so you'll know when other videos become available. If you have children in other grade levels, I hope you'll check out those grade level specific videos. And thanks so much for watching.